I think more than any particular teacher I had, it was more just the exposure of like what I was listening to. Because I feel like composition teachers, they can be hugely important and they were hugely influential, but teaching composing almost isn't more like mentoring composing, is more about like how you deal with your own ideas and the process and things like that. I found to be most fruitful, and not necessarily like the nitty gritty of like what the pitches are in a sense, because it is a kind of a now like anything can be composition if you're like committed to the idea and you do it well.
This is Anna Walton. She is one of my colleagues over at Columbia University. She's just great. She's a couple of years under me in the program. You're like a fourth year,
I'm a fourth year. Yeah.
And I'm a sixth year. Well, technically, I'm out now.
Yes.
Basically, I got my degree.
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago. I don't know when this is coming out, but yeah. So that happened, and I've been just getting everybody from Columbia one by one. Hopefully, I get everybody. So. There are quite a few left. I have to get over here, but I'm glad that you're over here.
Yeah.
And no, it's just great. And the thing is with you is there's not a lot of people from California, or at least that did some college in California. And I know you went to Scripps over in Claremont. And I want to know like a little bit about what that was like to get started.
Yeah, it was interesting. I started as a physics major. This is the kind of like classic liberal arts story I feel like that they want you to tell, but it really did. I was kind of like, no, I like math, I like science, I'm going to like be a physics major. And I took a music class, as part of like my general ed requirements in addition to that. And of course I was already, doing music as like, a hobby and something that I was passionate about. And I was just like, okay, this is really, after a year, I was like, no, I'm obviously supposed to be a music major, and kind of gave up the gig. So that was good in the sense that they have that, flexibility, and you can kind of just, you like at Scripps, you go really for the school more than like a particular program or person, I think. So for me, that worked out well. It was a bit odd because I started as a music major and it's super small. So there's only a few music majors per class per year. But they don't actually have a composer there. So I ended up taking composition with Tom Flaherty at Pomona, which is part of this, Claremont College, like consortium type of thing. So that was really easy, but it was also interesting. I mean, I had a lot of flexibility in the sense that they were kind of like, what even is a composition thesis, and we were all kind of like making it up together with the professors,
So the degree was a music degree.
It wasn't just music.
Composition.
Yeah. Okay. My bachelor's just music.
But what do they expect you to do over there as part of the music degree? Like what sort of classes were you taking?
So you have to take a certain amount of theory classes. You have to do a certain amount of history classes, and then electives, and then a certain amount of performance, which I did. I did piano, and then I did choir the whole time I was there. But it's pretty light, actually. It's different from kind of the conservatory style, or even just, I think, like maybe at some bigger universities also that are a bit more focused on like the music schools. Like I never took counterpoint. I never took orchestration.
Really?
Really.
Wow. So so let me back up a little bit. So you went there for physics initially, right? But then
I would say I went there for Scripps. Okay. And I was like, I'm going to do physics because I was kind of like rejecting like this, I was trying to be like, nah, I'm not going to do music. I was kind of I was in denial about it, I feel like. Because when I finally was like, no, I'm going to do music, I'm like, everyone was like, well, yeah, obviously. So.
But when did that switch happen? Like,
it happened in the first year because you declare your major your sophomore year.
Oh, okay. So you still, you weren't really anything the first year then.
But I went into like physics for majors, like I was like, and I took math and like I was like focused on that.
Classes, yeah. That's funny because like I was a pre-med at USC for one day.
One day.
I lasted one day. I saw the schedule of classes I had to take, and they were telling me that I had to take all these science courses every single summer if I was going to graduate on time. Yeah. Because the music workload at USC was like 132 credits or something like this over 4 years. and then another, like, I don't remember how many credits on top of that. So you had to like, and I had a scholarship, so I had to be within the scholarship parameter.
Right.
I had to do it all in 4 years.
Right.
And I was like, I can't do this, like,
Wow.
this is not what I want to do at all. But I was thinking about it. But
Wow.
It's interesting that for you actually took the classes. See, I never sat in a biology class or any of that stuff.
But
I
did
didn't
you
even
not have to, for your like general ed, you didn't have to do a science course or anything like that?
No,
there?
I took a bunch of AP classes. Did you have to do that in high school?
I took AP, but Scripps doesn't like take any AP.
Okay.
And they have a pretty broad GE curriculum, so in a way, like, I ended up knocking out my GEs by starting like thinking I was going to do physics anyway, because you do have to take some kind of science. And yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I took a lot of AP classes in high school, so it was like I had a lot of general ed stuff already done. So I did have to do some general ed stuff, but it was very minimal compared to somebody that didn't take any AP classes going in.
Right.
So USC was really good about that. But yeah, I mean, I'm always interested to know, like, when you get into a school, especially like Scripps, it's not like a conservatory or anything like this. Right. There's not musicians running around. Like, how do you make that switch in your head? Like, not only do I want to be some kind of musician, I want to be a composer, because there's no one really there to play your stuff. So like, where does that? Because for me at USC, it was fairly, I have to say, looking back, it was fairly easy, because you walk around the practice rooms, you can just tap on the glass and ask a flute player to play this lick for you, and boom, if it sounds good or not.
Right.
And but if you're not in that environment, it's like, how do you get that feedback, and how do you even decide to be a composer in the first place?
Now, quick pit stop to let you know that I do offer one-on-one consultations and lessons in regards to anything composition related. This can range for helping you put together your portfolio for any composition degree that you're applying to, or you might want to improve your creative chops as a composer from week to week or month to month. Or you might want to get a better handle of the behind the scenes of what it's like to be a composer. How do you sell your sheet music? How do you negotiate commission rates? How do you apply to contests? How do you apply to grants? How do you do anything as a composer, let alone just writing the music? So if this is you, you can contact me using the link down in the description below.
Well, I was already writing music. So I started as like a singer-songwriter type of person, which I think is pretty common. But I was doing that in high school already. I moved halfway through high school from Ohio to Claremont, actually, which was just like a terrible time to move. I mean, it's like really tough, to move like 2 years before, you graduate from high school. So I kind of just threw myself into music, and I really started writing a lot of songs. And, I had like a music MySpace and like, playing, and I played in a couple coffee shops and stuff like that. So it was already something that I just loved to do myself. And then I kind of I took some of the, Western music history classes, and I was really moved by the teacher. They had really, passionate, really good teachers there, the professors, and I thought, okay, this is, I mean, it sounds very cliche, but I remember hearing Rite of Spring and being like, oh my God, I didn't know music could be like this.
I was the same way too. Rite of Spring was my first
piece too. It opened my eyes, and I was like, wow, music can make you feel like it can be something other than beautiful. And it can still be strong. You know what I mean? I felt like, wow, I feel this in my gut, And I loved it. And then that started, then I started kind of like going down YouTube rabbit holes, really kind of myself also piecing together new music and like more contemporary stuff. And then I thought basically so there you have to do a thesis. I know not every school is the same, but at Scripps you have to do a senior thesis.
Is that a written thesis or like an essay kind of thing? Or
that's the thing. Okay. Is since there were no composition majors, we were kind of in discourse, like what would that look like? And they decided, well, it would be 30 minutes of music. And I was like, do I want to write like a 100-page paper, or do I want to write 30 minutes of music? And I was like, for sure, 30 minutes of music. Like, that's like, is that even
no-brainer?
Yeah. So I was like, no.
The 30 minutes of music might take longer to do, actually.
Oh, I'm sure it did. Yeah, but it was just like, that's clear. And then, the fact that choice was clear for me was just kind of like, okay, this is what I want to do,
Yeah. So you decided you wanted to do that, like, so you're doing the singer-songwriter kind of thing, but then what age was it that you switched to, or what age did you hear Rite of Spring? Was that your freshman year, sophomore year?
That was the spring of my freshman year.
Okay, so you were like 18, 19 or something at that point.
Yeah, I was like 19, and then the next semester, Scripps has actually they have this something called the core program, which maybe is something similar to like Columbia. You know, they sell this like generally, I don't know, cultured, or I don't know how they put it.
It's funny how it's a selling point.
Yeah, and then you have to do it. You're like, oh,
and then
God,
when you get the kids in the classroom to actually do it, they're like, none of them want to be there.
Yeah.
I'm like,
so they have something like that, and but it's a little different. So core one, every single student in the first class takes the same class. And usually you read a lot of like heavy hitting philosophy and stuff like that in this like giant seminar. And then core 2 and 3 are more like shoot offs that are supposed to kind of relate to core 1, but there's different classes. And so for my core 3, I ended up taking a class with David Kubek, who actually now is conductor for Fonema. So he ended up getting into new music. Oh. Even though he, mostly does, he's an orchestral conductor mostly. But anyway, he taught a class where we basically went through Alex Ross's The Rest is Noise.
The Rest is Noise, yeah.
And so also that kind of also started to open my eyes and be like, okay, there's other things out there, And then by my junior year, that's when I started like composing for, string quartet or piano or whatever.
So like during this whole time, like at Scripps, I mean, did you have other like composer colleagues? Were you ever part of any sort of community of like-minded people, or did that not come until after you were done?
Yeah, there was one other composition student in my year, which was funny. Although he was at Harvey Mudd, and a ton of Harvey Mudd, which is the engineering school in the consortium, a ton of Harvey Mudd students took music at Scripps. Something about hard science and engineering and music mix, I guess. So it was kind of a coincidence that he also decided that he wanted to be a composer, to be a composition major. So I actually had a partner in that, although he wasn't at Scripps per se. He was in the Scripps program. But it was really just the two of us. And there are only a few music majors a year, and it's not like, you don't go there. It's not like Oberlin Conservatory or something.
Right.
Like you don't go there if you like want to be a professional musician. So it was really just kind of like doing with what, working with the people who were there. And it was actually a really nice experience though, just going up to people that I knew from choir or just asking for recommendations and, saying, okay. And in general, people like just students were really willing to try, even though, I didn't know what I was doing even, I didn't know how to run a rehearsal, or I didn't know anything about new music techniques, but they were just really willing to like sit and rehearse with me, totally for free and just like try it out, even though they weren't even really like, they weren't going to go on to be, professional musicians or anything.
Yeah, and if you're like one of the only composers there, also there's also like, oh,
right.
That's the composer.
Right. Yeah,
yeah. Like, oh wow, you're the composer.
It's like a cool experience, I think. Where we were like, yeah, I made up this song. Do you want to play it? And in general, they were like, yeah.
Yeah, because I like when I was at Juilliard, especially at Juilliard, I have to say, it's like there were a lot of composers, and to be honest with you, the last thing the musicians there wanted to do was to play your stuff, unless they were friends with you or something, or they happened to like your music, which was
there's
rare.
no novelty there, It's like not like interesting new experience I've never heard of before. It's more like, oh, another composer who's desperate
or another thing I have to do, or another favor I have to do. It's just there's like this transactional kind of feeling you get that it makes sense from their perspective too, because they're there for a certain kind of training, and they didn't expect to do these other things.
Right.
But there are composers there; they need to get their stuff played, so that stuff has to happen eventually, right? So,
yeah. I mean, on the flip side, like none of those people, I'm obviously not working with them today. Like you don't make connections for your career because it's like, well, those people are doctors now, or like whatever they're doing. Yeah. But it was a nice way to like start,
Yeah, but I don't know about you, but like for me at least, those connections that I made in school, even at USC or Juilliard, they kind of come and go. Sometimes I have people that I really liked working with, and it was mutual. But then they went off to a different city, or they're just
Right.
doing something else, or my interests have changed. And then, it's not like this relationship that just like continues on like this.
Right.
It's just like, it has interruptions, and then you have to find new people. It's like always finding, that's the thing with me. I don't know how you feel about this, but it's like, it's very tiring to like always find new people
Yeah.
to collaborate with. It's exciting, but also at a certain point, it's like, I wish I could settle down, settle down
Like
with the
have
group.
your few, like, yeah.
Like that, not as like intense as like a Philip Glass ensemble or Steve Reich ensemble or
Right.
stuff like that, where it's like they only really work with them on their experimental stuff. But I feel like it would be beneficial to have a few groups where it's like, okay, if I want to write a string quartet, I know that they will play it,
Right.
or at least go through it, no questions asked, because they like working with me.
Yeah.
But that hasn't really, I don't know. I'm curious with you, because we'll get into your stuff, but you write a lot of, at least the stuff that I heard, the choral work is like very, there's definitely a voice there, like very focused kind of thing you're doing there. And I wonder with that, especially if you found your group, because it sounds like that just from hearing the music. Because at least for me, writing for orchestras and string quartet, like these really typical ensembles, it's like, it feels like there's not like I don't have a bass orchestra, all right,
Right.
XYZ orchestra, you're always going to be the ones that I work with, and it's not like that. So I wonder what it's like for you.
Yeah, I don't think I have that necessarily. I think there's one ensemble that I feel that I have like a relationship with, which is Switch Ensemble, and they were kind of the first ensemble when I was, I met them actually at a festival, one of these, like American festivals, but it's in Europe, and you like go and whatever, and they play your piece. But I felt like I really connected with them, and they were some of the first people to be like, your music is good, and we're gonna play it again. And I was like, wow, what, and so they've played my pieces several times and like programmed me, and then we applied to a grant together. So I feel like I do have a relationship with them. Like I could reach out and, so I have that relationship with them, but I think it's tough, to find ensemble. There's just like so many composers in the world, and it's like one of these also just life, human like interaction kind of things, it's like building relationships with people. It's not as simple as, it can be kind of transactional, I think.
It's also tough for composers in general, because we are told all the time to just focus on the music, which is true, but there are these other factors that go into play.
There are totally other factors, and it's like learning, like you're dealing with human beings, and like figuring that part out. Recently, I worked on a piece that truly was a collaboration, like kind of a long process with a performer, and then like, recordings, and a piece came out of that. But that was, I feel, really the first time it was really that kind of deep collaboration that I've worked on, because a lot of people talk about collaboration, but a lot of times that's not really how it's formatted, right? It's more like, okay, maybe you do a workshop, but then you basically send a score, and then maybe you get feedback from it. Like is most of the time what my experience is. But,
same
I mean,
here.
do you have people that you're really like, no, these are people that I collaborate with? Like
in terms of like, I write the piece, and like as I'm writing the piece, it's like back and forth. I try to do that, and I always say to the ensemble that I am intending to do that, but it's just very difficult, because you want an answer kind of quickly, like within a couple of days, but then if it doesn't come, you kind of have to you got to keep going,
right.
So that is always my intention at the beginning, but I always know that it's not really going to happen the way that I want to in my mind.
Right.
But everybody has good intentions, just that it's very hard to make that space for whatever that true collaboration is.
Well, I think it's, in this case, I recently did this with a trumpet player called Chloe Abbott who's based in the Netherlands, and we're friends. And that's why we could do it, because I could invite her over, and we would have coffee, and then spend 2 hours like in the studio recording stuff, and then to have another conversation. And it's like, if you're working with an ensemble where you're like, the time is, scheduled like rehearsal time, it's just like not the same.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And to be honest with you, my brain is wired that way now. It's like, okay, what can I do that I can get in an hour, 2 hours?
No, it's how the system works.
Yeah.
So it's smart to do that. Then you have more successful, like there's a reason why that you do that, right?
I mean, I want the stuff to sound good at the end of the day. I don't want it to be like, oh, I really intended this, and then like make excuses for why something sounded that way. Like I hate doing that because I don't want to put the musicians in that predicament either. And it has happened a couple of times where the musicians weren't comfortable playing the stuff, and I'm like, well, I really hate that feeling of making the musicians feel that way, because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable on stage either. I want them to be confident in what they're doing.
Totally.
So that's part of the reason. But yeah, you're right. It is kind of catering to the system. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know,
I
don't know how
too.
to feel about that either, actually.
No, but I feel like you're working with what you got, and the only time I really felt like that wasn't the case, it was truly a friendship, and that was also with an individual, which is also, I think, more possible. It's like, you inviting me here, I invite her over, and it's kind of work, but then we hang out, and like, so
yeah. Well, with that all being said, I want to play this piece called "The Deep Glens Where They Lived." Right? Did I say that right?
Yes.
I wrote it terribly on my card, but let's hear it. I mean, so when I heard this piece, to me, like, especially the section that we played right now, to me it sounds like, to me I call it the Giacinto Chelsea section. This part where you have these really tight notes going on, like G, G half sharp, this kind of thing. But it's not just that. It's this thing with the pipes, and I didn't really understand when I was looking at the score what that was, but later I figured out what was going on.
Did you see the video?
I didn't see the video.
Okay, because obviously in the video you just see it. So yeah.
Actually, kind of like not seeing it. Like I had to guess what I was listening to, because I thought, maybe that is just a normal voice, but maybe not. Like I had me guessing looking at the score.
Right.
So I wonder if that would have changed my experience looking at the actual performers. But anyway, I'm just wondering from you, like, how did that all come about? Because to me, it sounded like something you would have to collaborate on. It doesn't sound like something you can just show up with.
Right. So that was one of the pieces that I've had this process that I also have continued to do. It depends on the situation, but which is where instead of collaborating directly with them, I like collaborate with myself. Like I make sure that I can do all of the experiment, I experiment and like make all the sounds myself. And then I translate to the performers like how to do that, basically. And especially as a vocalist, I liked, as a singer, I'm not like, I don't sing publicly or anything like that anymore, but I was in choir for like 20 years of my life, basically. So I like to sing. And so basically this piece, there's the PVC pipe, and then there's just a little hole cut in it in the side, almost like a flute, like a very rudimentary looking flute. And it actually started because in another piece, which is a talk piece, which I did my first year at Columbia, the ending, I have the Charlotte, the soprano, whisper something into the head joint of a flute. And that was just kind of a poetic solution. Like I didn't want it to start and end in the exact same way. I wanted to avoid that. So I thought, okay, I'll filter the sound of her whispering through a flute head joint since they have a flutist in the ensemble, right? And I thought more about that, and I thought, I really liked that sound. I think there's a lot of potential there, but it's not very realistic to ask 6 singers to have 6 flute head joints.
Okay.
That's not a good idea. So that's how the pipe came to be, basically. Okay, well, I can make something kind of similar and rudimentary and try this. And then I just started playing around with it and experimenting and recording myself. And I realized by the way, my dad helped me make them and just kind of picked a random length and width and didn't think too much about it. And they were all slightly different lengths. And then I realized, okay, actually they all have tones that are around a G. And so when I'm singing a G into them, then there's this kind of weird, resin, they have their own will. And if you do these little micro glisses, then it changes what's coming out, if you kind of bounce it on your mouth, basically. And so that's how those pitches got chosen, basically. And I thought, okay, well, then I can interweave these, and all the pipes are a little different, so the tuning's a little different. And that's how that piece was kind of born. Which has its also disadvantages because, I can't practice the bass, for example, singing.
So that was kind of a surprise when you heard the bass.
Yeah. And it was, maybe a very simple, not the most creative solution to just pop it as a bass, basically an octave below, and just have him like as a supporting role and some of those things that are too high, expect a bass to sing for a long period of time. But so that kind of experimenting myself and then passing it on, I found to be really fruitful, and getting away a little bit from this like imagining in my head what all the harmonies are going to sound like, which I still do, of course. It really depends on the situation. Like if you're going to write for orchestra or something like that, then that's kind of how that goes, or you make a mock-up or whatever the process is. But just working with physical objects, I found to be really fruitful thing. And that was one of the earlier pieces where I started that kind of process.
The idea of taking like an object or something not even like a PVC pipe is not something that's musically obvious choice to use. It's not like something that it obviously makes musical sound either, and the idea of like actually making it. So, but it seems like something that could be easily replicated. Like if another like similar choral group wants to do that, they can just go to Home Depot and buy a bunch of PVC pipes and
do what I did,
and do
right?
what you did, right?
You just need a drill bit and
you need a drill bit. You need to know how to use one.
You do have to like have a special drill bit to make the hole, but I think it's a reasonable ask, But yeah, it's also practical, and that's why I didn't ask for 6 flute head joints, because that's just a terrible idea. That's not a practical, thing to do. You could do that, and then it would have a premiere, and then that would be it.
And also there's kind of a visual thing too with the flute head joints, because then all of a sudden the sound of flute is in your head,
right?
Which is not what you want. You want this is a specific choral type of sound that you're going for,
right? But that's a nice reaction also that you had, because it's this kind of human and then non-human thing, an object modulating the human voice is also a part of that. So that's nice that you had this kind of sounds like singing.
I mean, well, that's what it was, and that kind of sound is so hard to do with voices, because I've done stuff, I tried to do things, I should say, with voices and microtones, because I'm like really into that kind of thing, and microtones, at least. Voices, not so much. I just can't figure out how to work with voices. But
I love working with voice.
But you're the opposite. You can do voices. And to hear it done that way, I'm like, oh wow, that's a way you can do it. Because for me, it's like I always ask singers to find like E half flat, like out of nowhere, and it just doesn't really happen.
Right.
But you did it in a way where it's like, well, it's not really about the microtones. It's more about the beating, and it's more about like the timbre that you're getting out of the microtones. So in a way, like if you don't have the score in front of you, it's not really about the microtones,
right?
Which I really like.
Right.
I really like that the piece is not about microtones, if that makes sense.
No, that's
at least
absolutely
that's the way I heard it.
Yeah, well, you and I think use microtones in very different ways. I basically always use them. I'm basically not that advanced, I use them as like a timbral sing, and I'm not usually so particular, like it needs to be exactly a quarter, and I very rarely write for anything smaller than a quarter, because for me it's like a departure and like a timbral blur. But of course, if you're using them in like particular systems, it's really important that they're like tuned correctly for it to like lock in place. So
yeah. Well, in this next piece that you shared with me, is a piece called Approximations. That's true. You did put minus 31 cents plus 41 cents.
Yes. Okay. Thanks for just
do all of that
like,
stuff.
Actually,
so let's hear it. It's a piece for alto sax, snare drum, vibes, piano, electric guitar. So I worked with this group too. I think I was on the same show, and my piece was kind of a riot.
It was such a fun piece, by the way.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. But yeah, I kind of, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, this piece called Sedect, which you can listen to after you watch this, which I kind of put on the program there just to see a reaction, because it was this pop song great. Kind of thing. But
yeah,
because I don't write like that anymore. But let's talk about your piece. I was surprised by what you just said, because you have all these things that say minus 31 cents on the B flat, which is the seventh partial of the C fundamental. Yes. But then you got like an not actual, but I should say equal tempered B flat going on at the same time. Yes. And this is the part that we just played. So you are picking things, but it seems like it's also for a timbral effect. Actually. Okay. I have to, normally I do what I just said previously, which is I'm normally just thinking like timbrally. This was a different kind of situation, because the idea for this piece started with just playing the lowest C on the piano for a really long time. And if you do that like several minutes and hold the pedal down, it is wild. Like everyone who has a grand piano should do it, because it's just absolutely wild, the sine tones and the partials and all this kind of higher stuff that comes in and out, and it's just amazing. And so that was the concept of the piece, and that's indeed, the pianist has very few notes, and most of the piece they're just playing that lowest C. So in this case, it was orchestrating that low C out, which is why I was working with those particular pitches as partials of a C fundamental.
but within the range of, the other instruments. But yes, then mixing them with the vibes and, equal tempered stuff, which is, in a way, it's kind of both things, like working more with particular microtones, but then mixing it in a timbral way with, their equal tempered counterparts. Yeah. So it's kind of both in a sense, that piece.
I do remember now that you say that, when I was in the hall, that phenomenon. But on the recording, I didn't get as much of that for whatever reason. But yeah, I do remember now, actually, that you bring that up, that there was like this kind of like resonant thing with all these different tones and things
and the space, like I know people are always talking about this, but really the space literally changes which tones you hear so much. Like when we were doing the sound check, I remember David, who's the sound engineer, was like worried for a sec that we were getting feedback, but it was just a high, it was a really strong high part. Like we actually stopped and we're like, wait, no, and like, no, it's just coming from the piano.
Wow. That's crazy. And did you hear, like, were there certain pitches? So were the pitches that I know we're getting like really deep into this, but that's what the piece is about. Were the partials that you picked out, like the minus, like the 7th partial, and then you even went up to like the 13th partial? I don't know if you went higher than that, but were these pitches selected because you heard them coming out of the piano as you were practicing it? Wow.
So I recorded it and then I went back, and also just as I was there, I just wrote down what I was hearing. I mean, knowing, of course, the title is approximations. So again, knowing that in the different space and a different piano, maybe they wouldn't be as strong, right? Because it just depends. But I just use that as a jumping off point, and that's how I picked the partials.
Yeah, because like when you know that exercise where you just kind of like play on the, you kind of find partials by like touching nodes on the string and just hitting the key. Like I could never really get past like the 7th partial, or I barely get to the 7th, and I'm just like pretending to hear.
Yeah, well then it becomes more like thud, right? Like after,
Yeah, but like that you actually heard like the 13th partial, like that's like crazy to me, that you can get it to that point where you can hear those higher partials.
And not from playing the notes.
Right.
Which is, just from the resonance of the piano. I mean, it's really amazing what happens if you just sit and do that for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really exciting. Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, it's like, so both pieces, I mean, it just happened to be these two pieces. I don't have other pieces to share, but those two pieces deal with microtonality in a very similar kind of way, but one is more exact with the partials while the other is not, because of the way that the PVC pipes are working.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, all this kind of stuff, and I think Columbia has kind of reputation for this a little bit, but a lot of this kind of stuff is like stuff that's like imported from Europe, and that's kind of something that we both have in common a little bit, that, we started out in California with our our music composition education, which is like the wild, wild west, with anything kind of goes, I feel like, over there. But then you went over to Europe, right? I mean, you went over to Graz to study with Beat Führer, which is like, big name.
Yeah.
What was, like, were all these techniques and things you were learning, did it come from there initially, or going down your YouTube rabbit hole? I mean, like, how did like that style change from like songwriting to the stuff you're doing now?
I think more than any particular like teacher I had, it was more just the exposure of like what I was listening to, because I feel like composition teachers, they can be hugely important and they were hugely influential, but teaching composing almost isn't, more like mentoring composing, is more about like how you deal with your own ideas and the process and things like that, I found to be most fruitful, and not necessarily like the nitty gritty of like what the pitches are, in a sense, because it is a kind of a, now like anything can be composition if you're like committed to the idea and you do it well. But I think Graz was really important and influential because I was just going to a lot of concerts. I went to Impulse while I was there. That's a ton of concerts, and just the things that that I was hearing and exposed to, a lot more European music and like German music. But, I also just tried to go to a lot of festivals, since especially my bachelor and master's, my master's also wasn't at a like conservatory type place. It was also an extremely small department. So I kind of supplemented not having necessarily as much access or exposure to stuff that someone who went to a conservatory might, by trying to do a lot of summer festivals for a few years. And so also just those experiences and, you know, like hearing what other people are doing, and honestly, YouTube rabbit holes, like you can learn a lot from YouTube, you know?
Especially now that you could find literally
Especially
anything.
now. Yeah, I mean, this was starting when I was doing this, it was more than 10 years ago is when I started. But even then, you know, just listening, you know, it was the most important thing, I think, to kind of get that influence. And then, you know, you start to digest more and more, and I think you take little bits with you, and then I think you reach a point where not that much seems new or surprising in a sense, and then that's kind of up to you, I guess, to create something that you find like new and surprising and interesting.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I feel the same way. Like I know so many things now, but it's also like, well, part of you feels like, well, I want to try all those things, but then the kind of, you know, the other part of me says, you know, you got to just stick to what you know in a sense, but add those things slowly over time. And that's like really hard for me to do. I'm like, I kind of want to try all the new things.
yeah.
But I know that if I try to do that, like everything that I've done before will kind of get erased in a way. So I don't know. It's always a bit, I feel like, I don't know if everybody struggles with this, but at least I do. It's like, I feel like my stuff at least is like so relatively conservative to things that I hear. And it makes me like wonder if I'm like pushing my art as far as I could. But I know that I'm coming from a place, especially like 5, 6, 7 years ago, that was like so different than how I am now, that like maybe this is the correct progression for me. Right. So like for you, like starting out as like a, you know, singer-songwriter, I mean, that's like, you know, that's like a different art form almost entirely. Totally. So to go from that and over like 4, 5, 6 years, you know, be writing this kind of stuff you're doing now, or even more years, I guess, it's a big change. And I don't think people really realize like the progression, like the true progression you're taking as an artist, you know, with the over time. Right. You know, they just hear that piece that right. you wrote, you know, and that's you now, but they don't know that, okay, that's not where you started. There's a backlog of progression that got to that point, and maybe that piece sounds conservative or whatever compared to something else, but for you it's like that was the logical progression over time. Right.
I mean, I think the longer I compose, the more I think when I started to, I made it felt like a schism where I was like, okay, I was doing songs before and now I'm writing, you know, classical music for string quartets, and like this is a totally different thing. And the more time I do it, the more I actually think it's coming from the same inner like creative place, activating the same kind of things. The further I get, I see those as actually related. And because it's the same search, I mean, maybe the singer-songwriter, there's a little bit more of this, like, you know, also I was like 17, so I was really emo, and like I had all these things that I had to express about myself. So I don't necessarily think about it in that direct of a way now, but just this search for something that feels exciting and just this instinct, you know, is the same instinct I'm tapping into now. But I think, you know, in terms of what you're saying about like the journey and like how do you incorporate things, I feel like I have two reactions to that. One is that I know exactly what you mean. And I think it has to do with it being authentic to the music for me. Like, does the music need this? Or, you know, am I just wanting to add, you know, I try to avoid adding things in as like flavoring or just to add them, and figuring a way how to, you know, to create music where it's like part from the root part of the music, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
You know, I think that's important. And also the other thing is like, there's no one direction, right? Going from conservative to like non-conservative. It's like you know, how long ago did Anna Lockwood burn a piano? Right, like we've done everything now. Like it's all been done. All the radical stuff has been done. So just do something like interesting and particular to you. You know what I mean?
That's the thing. It's freeing in a way,
Yeah.
but also it's scary because you can do whatever you want and it's freeing.
Right.
And yeah, and it's almost like, well, what's the point if everything's, but there's also that trickles into my brain every so often. Well, what's the point if like this has already been done, you know? But also part of it is like, I actually really like, especially I have to say, last 3-4 years, I've realized that I do enjoy composing. Might sound crazy to say as someone, I've been writing music since I was 8, but if I'm really, really honest with myself, I didn't like love the act of composing. I would like kind of dread like having to go and do it, you know. I like the idea of having a piece done and hearing and all that stuff, but like the actual work involved, like I just never looked forward to doing it. And now I'm the opposite. I'm like, I can't wait to like, you know, log in my time today to compose. That being said, you know, I don't write 8 hours a day or anything like that. I think that's part of the reason I write very little, actually, maybe 1-2 hours a day on average.
Yeah.
If I were to average out the week, it's probably around that amount of time. And just making sure that time is like sacred time. I think that's something I learned from Georg Friedrich Haas. It's like this spiritual time, you know, like almost like going to church, just kind of feeling. And I feel like, well, that is why I'm doing it. Not so much like if I get into that mindset, then almost like whatever I write, like even if it sounds like something else, doesn't really matter. Because that process of getting there is like what I loved about it. And that took, oh my God, I mean, it took so long to get to that point.
I relate to that so much. I also realized like I'm not enjoying composing. Sometimes, you know, it really felt like work and it felt like pulling teeth. That's really what it felt like. Just every like new note and what is this going to be? And now what is this going to be? And it really felt like pulling teeth. And sometimes I like the results from that process of pulling teeth is the thing. But I also realized with this kind of, you know, we're talking about the PVC pipe, or recently I had a piece for Yarn Wire where they were mostly just playing mallets on the side of a piece of wood. And that was so fun to write. Like, because I was just at home, like bouncing a mallet off the end of a table and figuring out how many ways I could do that. And it was so fun. And so also this way of working where I'm playing with, like, it feels like playing, you know, and that feels so different than like imagining, okay, what are the harmonies like of this going to sound like? So just for me, that's also been a really like fruitful change, you know, like enjoying composing again.
Yeah, I've done something similar in that way of like changing my way of composing. Recently, it's going to sound pretty normal to most people listening, I suppose, but like using a sequencer, like I never did that, like using like Logic or something to write. But I mean, I'm still in front of the computer, you know, that's the kind of negative part, but at least I'm like looking at something, I'm like looking at music in a different way than just like notes on a paper. Yeah. So to me, that's like different enough where I can find something new while I'm writing, and that thing with the mallets on the like table and stuff like that was it for you.
And then you get feedback, right? Like immediate feedback.
Right. Exactly.
That's also I feel like that, I don't know, it like activates something or some sense of joy or something, as opposed to just this like abstract, you know, thing on paper. Also, sometimes I use like a DAW and I feel a very similar way. Like there's something about having that feedback and it just makes it like, oh, I hear the potential in this and it's exciting. And yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But when I write for orchestra, it's like, it's very, very strange. I don't know if you've written for orchestra or a big ensemble before, but for whatever reason, when I get into a rehearsal with an orchestra, it's never really that surprising what I get, but it's always extremely surprising when I work with a smaller group, because the sound is like so much more vulnerable, and I didn't really get that when I was listening or in my head or whatever. Right. And the individualistic elements of each of the instruments it really is different, I feel like. But then when an orchestra or a big choir, you know, for example, like you already have that that homogeneity, you know, in your head. So it's more predictable. It's more predictable, even though there's more players. So that to me has been like my next kind of, like, I'm writing an orchestra piece. I'm starting an orchestra piece hopefully next week. I started, and that's like one of the things I'm thinking about. Like, how do I make this thing? Like, that's like a new challenge. Like, how do I make this thing not sound so predictable? Like, how do I, like, you see an orchestra there, but it's not an orchestra.
That's
like
tough.
When the sound is not an orchestra. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
and your choral work was like this too, where I hear it as a quiet. I hear voices, but what the heck is that? You know? But it's so simple what you did, but it changed the sound completely. Like you don't get that out of a choir normally. So
Right.
it's an interesting thing that you did because it gets the juices flowing, but then you think about it in a different way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you do like mock-up or like use MIDI or record stuff or like?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I
Yeah.
use playback and MIDI
Yeah.
and all that stuff. Oh yeah, but increasingly I've been using Logic because I've been being stupid and and doing things with like partials like up to like the 25th partial.
Right. So then you
stupid
have
things
to,
like that.
yeah,
So I have to
right.
like I can't like pretend I know what those sound like.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Yeah.
figuring out intervals that I like and, and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm in the middle of now. Like,
How do the microtones work in orchestra? Like, what is that experience like?
well, for me, I've basically only been using quarter tones. So I only pick a few. So
Yeah.
like E half flat, A half flat, B half flat. Like I just pick a few and I kind of stick with those. And then depending on the key I'm using, like the E half flat becomes the second degree of a D scale, or it can become the sixth degree of a G scale, or the third degree of a C scale. So like you can change the way the microtone sounds in the harmony by
Right.
picking a new tonal center. So that's been like kind of like my crutch.
Smart. Yeah.
You know, like the last few pieces have been like that, but I really would like to figure out like how to make these like soundscapes where I'm not just using quarter tones. And yeah, that's the next kind of challenge, like how to do that. So anyway, I have no idea, but I'm trying to figure out like what the next step is
Right.
and not just be in my old ways.
Right.
Just
What
like,
you know
figure out-
works.
Right, you know, because I know
Yeah.
that works, but I don't know what the next thing will be. When I start next week, I guess I'll start to throw some darts at the page, you know, but
Yeah.
we'll see. So
Is this the LA Phil?
yeah.
Nice.
But the
Exciting.
rehearsal time is pretty limited. It's probably not going to get more than an hour or so.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, but we'll see. I probably will post some stuff in the next couple of months. Me
Yeah.
banging my head on the wall. Maybe just that, like 30 times over 5 minutes or something, and that would be the video. I don't know. Yeah. But thanks for coming. This was really a lot
Yeah.
of fun.
Thanks so much for having me.
You can check out Anna's links down in the description below. I have those 2 pieces. I also have her website, so please check those out when you get a chance. And thanks again.
Thank you.